Have you ever felt like your life is an incomplete melody full of low notes and silences, but then one day you find the companion who helps you play the most beautiful notes in your life? Today you're about to witness a miraculous story where music isn't just a part of life, but the only bridge connecting hearts filled with pain and fear. A blind boy too afraid to face the world, and a homeless girl with nothing but music in her heart. Could their friendship change both of their destinies? Melody and Alex, a poor girl with an extraordinary musical talent and a blind boy pushed by his father to face the hardest challenge of his life. But what happens when two seemingly different lives come together? Come discover a touching story of music truth and family secrets that will leave you speechless. Don't miss out, click on the video now to see how music can change a life. The Grand Hall of Westfield High School was adorned magnificently. Crystal chandeliers emitted a warm glow reflecting off the glossy tile floor, creating an atmosphere of solemnity. It was time for the performance, and the audience, consisting of parents, students, and even sponsors, was packed. In this space, music was everything, and everyone eagerly awaited the opportunity to witness exceptional talent. Down below, Alex Drake sat silently in a corner behind a large curtain holding a cane, his face full of anxiety. The 6-year-old boy, blind since birth, had never known what the world outside looked like. Alex lived in the darkness of his own world, but he always felt the world through sound. He loved music, though he had never formally learned to play an instrument. It was the only sound that made Alex feel connected to everything, even if it was through the music of others. But today was different. He had to step onto the stage under the glaring lights where thousands of eyes would be fixed on him and play the piano. Not to showcase his talent, but as a challenge set by his father, Adrian Drake. Alex could not understand why his father had forced him to do this. How many times had he been placed in challenges he could never overcome? "You will never grow up if you don't learn to face challenges," Adrian had said, but this time, this challenge seemed too great. "Alex, are you ready?" Isabella. Alex's mother asked gently, but in her voice there was a trace of worry she couldn't hide. She looked at her son, who had grown up in her care and love, but had never received acceptance from his father. Alex raised his head, sensing his mother's presence through her voice. He pressed his lips tightly together and nodded, but inside he felt overwhelmed with fear. Everything around him seemed too vast, too unfamiliar. He could not see, but he could sense that all eyes were on him. At that moment, Adrian, the stern father, walked over to him. He said nothing, only looked at his son with his usual cold, impassive gaze. Adrian, who had built a colossal financial empire, a man who always expected his son to overcome every obstacle to prove himself, seemed unconcerned about his son's feelings. "You can do it," Adrian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "If you can't overcome this challenge, you will never succeed in life." Isabella looked at her husband but said nothing. She knew that Adrian's words were always authoritative with no room for listening. But today, she could do nothing but stand beside her son and hope. The lights in the hall suddenly dimmed. On stage, the announcer's voice echoed, introducing each performance. And next, a special performance by student Alex Drake. A dry round of applause came from the audience, their gazes filled with curiosity, even mockery. Alex stood up, feeling the unsteadiness in his legs. He slowly made his way toward the stage, each step a struggle against his own weakness. With his cane in hand, he felt the tension that filled the space around him. Fear surged inside Alex. He didn't know what to do on the piano, an instrument he had never touched. Music was something distant for him, and now he had to do it in front of everyone. Melody was a 7-year-old homeless girl, living with her mother in a refugee camp near the school. Although she lacked a stable family and formal education, Melody had a natural talent. She could play the piano, not through books, but simply by feeling the music from the sounds around her. Her tiny fingers gently glided over the old piano she found at a second-hand store, each note resonating like a connection between her and the world. Melody couldn't see the world like others, but she saw everything through music. On that day, as Melody entered the hall, she sensed a shift in the atmosphere. A strange feeling enveloped her when she heard Alex's name called to the stage. She didn't know Alex, but she had a strong sense that the boy needed help. Melody didn't think much about it. She just wanted to help because music had saved her, and she wanted to save someone through music. Melody stood up and made her way to the stage, her heart pounding. At that moment, Alex was sitting at the piano, his hands trembling as he tried to feel the cold keys beneath his small hands. He didn't know where to begin, didn't know what to do. Melody approached Alex, saying nothing. She gently placed her hand over his, causing Alex to stop and look up, feeling the warmth from her touch. She whispered, "I will help you. We'll play together." Alex's eyes brightened. Though he couldn't see Melody, he could feel the sincerity in her voice. Melody's fingers slowly settled on the keys, and Alex followed. The notes began to emerge from the piano, not a perfect song, but enough to make everyone around them astonished. This was not just a musical performance, but a miracle, a beautiful moment. The audience in the hall grew silent. The mocking looks faded, replaced by respect, a sense of emotion filling the room. A few tears appeared at the corners of parents' eyes. They realized that even though Alex couldn't see, he could still play music and feel it deeply. And when they finished the piece, the hall erupted in applause. It wasn't applause for the perfection of the music, but for the courage, the friendship, and the transformation they had just witnessed. The hall was now silent, with only the lingering echoes of applause reverberating like a wave spreading through the space. People began to leave their seats, but they continued to discuss the performance that had just taken place. Alex and Melody, the two protagonists of the evening, remained seated on the stage. Melody sat next to Alex, looking at him with a warm and sincere gaze. Alex turned to look at Melody. His eyes could not see, but he felt a different kind of light coming from her. For the first time, he felt a real connection, not through his mother's words, not through his father's teachings, but through a friend, a girl who had entered his life with an open heart. "Thank you," Alex said, his voice still trembling, but his words full of sincerity. Melody smiled, her face glowing like a little star in the dark night. She didn't say anything, but gently patted Alex's hand as if to say, "It's all right." At that moment, a strange feeling washed over Alex. He couldn't fully understand it, but there was an inner impulse in his heart that he had found something very precious. Perhaps it was friendship, perhaps it was music, or perhaps it was simply the sincerity that Melody brought. These feelings couldn't be expressed in words, only felt through the beats of his heart. After that memorable performance, Alex began to experience a noticeable change. He no longer felt afraid when thinking about engaging with music. On the contrary, the musical notes that Melody had taught him bit by bit were becoming a part of his life. He had started playing simple pieces that Melody had shown him during the performance, but now he felt a new confidence not because he could play the piano well, but because he felt music as part of his heart. At home as night fell, Alex sat by the piano in his room, his small hands gliding over the keys. Every time he pressed a key, he didn't just hear the sound. He also felt the music with all his senses. He couldn't see the piano keys, but his hands could sense the vibrations from each note, the emotions they conveyed. He recalled what Melody had said, "When you play, let the music enter your heart." That feeling made Alex feel like he was soaring free within the space of music. Every time he finished a piece, his heart would race, feeling light and happy. There was a simple joy, a freedom Alex had never experienced before. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, he just needed to immerse himself in the music and feel it. Isabella, Alex's mother, stood at the door, looking at her son. Her smile hid an overwhelming sense of pride. She couldn't believe that her son had found joy in music after all the difficulties and pressures he had endured. She didn't know how to help him rise, but one thing she was sure of, her son was changing every day. And she knew that although she couldn't change the past, she could help Alex have a hopeful future. The next day, Melody came to visit Alex at school. She found him in a corner of the schoolyard, sitting alone, occasionally stopping to feel the music from the headphones he had on. Melody walked over and sat next to him. "You play music really well," Melody said, her voice full of admiration. Alex smiled, lowering his head slightly, then turned to look at her. Though he couldn't see, he could feel the warmth in Melody's eyes. "Thank you. I've never felt like this before, Alex said, his hands still tightly gripping his cane. Melody looked directly into his eyes. I know. Music isn't something everyone can easily feel, but you've done it. I know you can go further. Alex looked at Melody surprised. Do you think I could learn to play another piece? Melody nodded, her eyes lighting up. Of course. What would you like to learn? The two began discussing the pieces they wanted to play together. Melody started teaching Alex some basic techniques to feel the music through his hands. It wasn't just about how to play the piano, but how to live with music, how to let music fill the space around you and make your heart beat to its rhythm. Every afternoon, Melody and Alex met after school to practice. Melody wasn't just a friend, she was also the first teacher in Alex's musical life. Under her guidance, Alex began to feel a freedom in playing the piano, and he realized that even without seeing anything, music could help him overcome all barriers. Day by day, as Alex grew better at playing the piano, the changes within his family became more apparent. Adrian, the cold and strict father, started paying more attention to his son. Every time Alex sat at the piano, Adrian stood at the door, watching without saying a word. During those moments, the atmosphere in the house became heavy, and no one dared to speak. But even so, in Adrian's eyes, there was a strange emotion he had never experienced before, a sense of pride. Isabella noticed the change in her husband's eyes, but she didn't dare speak up. She still feared that the pressures Adrian placed on their son would bring everything back to square one. One evening, when the family was having dinner, Adrian suddenly spoke. Alex, he called his son. Can you play a piece for me? Alex was startled, but he didn't hesitate. He nodded and walked over to the piano. He felt the silence in the room. He had once been afraid of moments like this, but now he didn't feel the pressure anymore. He just played the notes he loved with all his heart. And during those moments, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. The next day, Melody came looking for Alex. She heard the sound of his piano from a distance. When she entered the room, Melody smiled and said, I heard you playing from outside the door. It's amazing, Alex. Alex smiled, but then felt a little sad. I can only play simple pieces. I'm still not good enough. Melody sat down next to Alex, looking straight into his eyes. I don't care how good you are. What matters is how you feel when you play. That's real music. When Alex heard Melody say that, his heart felt warm. He knew that even though he couldn't see the world, music had opened a new door in his life, a journey he had never imagined. And now with Melody by his side, that journey would no longer be a lonely one. In the days following the school performance, the atmosphere in the Drake household gradually began to change. Alex continued to study music with Melody each day, becoming a new journey of discovery. He began playing the piano better, feeling the music more deeply, and most importantly, he felt freedom within himself. Despite these changes, Adrian still did not feel at ease. Adrian Drake, the wealthy and powerful father, had always lived in a world of control and success. In his eyes, his son's life must always be a victory, and Alex's disability was something to overcome. However, the changes in Alex's piano playing, coupled with Melody's presence, were slowly challenging everything Adrian thought he knew about his son. Adrian could not deny one thing. His son was not only improving musically, but he was also changing emotionally. Alex was becoming more confident, daring to express his feelings and thoughts. For someone like Adrian, this was not easy to accept. One afternoon, while Alex was practicing in his music room, Adrian stood outside the door listening. The melodies from the piano filled the air, and Adrian couldn't help but stop and pay attention. He realized something: the notes Alex was playing were not just the result of practice, but they contained a part of his soul. It was a connection that he had never considered before. Melody, Adrian whispered to himself, a name echoing in his mind. He had heard this name before, but he had never truly paid attention to her. Now she had become an important part of Alex's life. What was it about Melody that had the power to change his son so much? The next day, Adrian decided to hire a private detective team to investigate Melody and her family. Although he knew he couldn't uncover every detail, the urge to uncover the truth and the secrets of the past was too strong. Adrian, despite his cold and emotionless exterior, felt an odd compulsion to know more about Melody, about her family, and above all, about the possible connection between her and himself. Meanwhile, Isabella Alex's mother began to sense that something was wrong. She had always felt that there was a secret hidden within the family, something Adrian was trying to keep concealed. The secret investigations, the mysterious phone calls from her husband. All of it made her uneasy. Isabella knew her husband wouldn't stop until the truth was revealed. But would she have the courage to face it? Isabella had always been caught between conflicts, not only in her marriage, but also in raising Alex. She loved her son unconditionally, but had noticed how harsh Adrian was with him. She even worried about the harm Alex could suffer from his father's overwhelming expectations. But she couldn't change it. Adrian was the only one with authority in the family, and Isabella could only watch powerless. However, the changes in Alex gave Isabella hope. She no longer saw her son as a child who needed to endure, but as a boy who could rise above, live with his own passion, and embrace his talents. A day later, information about the Sullivan family was provided to Adrian by the detective team. Sarah Melody's mother was a woman with a mysterious past. They discovered that she had worked as Adrian's assistant many years ago, but was suddenly fired. What was suspicious was that Sarah had filed a lawsuit against the company, claiming she was forced to leave when she was pregnant, and afterwards she received a settlement. All these traces led to a theory that Adrian could not deny. Could Melody be his daughter? Adrian could not bear the doubt. He decided he must find the truth, no matter if it meant confronting the events from the past he had tried to forget. He began researching genetic markers, looking for features he had never noticed before. Meanwhile, Melody and her mother Sarah began to sense the changes in their lives. Sarah, with her anxious eyes, had noticed strange people searching for her and her daughter. She couldn't help but feel afraid. Sarah had always known that her past could not be buried forever, and now the truth about her family might soon be revealed. Melody, a 7-year-old girl, didn't understand everything. She only knew that her life was never peaceful. She had to run from city to city with her mother. She didn't want to be found, so she never told anyone about her past. However, there was one thing Melody knew for sure. Music was the only thing that made her feel free, and without music she wouldn't survive. One evening, as Melody and Sarah were preparing to move to another place, strange footsteps echoed outside the window. Sarah stood up, hurried to the window, and looked outside. She saw 2 unfamiliar men standing just outside. They were watching her and her daughter's house in a peculiar way. "We need to leave now." "Melody," Sarah said, her voice full of worry. Melody looked at her mother, her eyes confused. "Mom, why are they looking at us?" Sarah didn't answer but simply pulled Melody into the room. The little girl could feel the fear in her mother's heart, but she couldn't understand why. "We have to go now. There's no time left," Sarah whispered, pulling Melody out of the room. Just as Sarah and Melody were about to run, the footsteps of the 2 strange men grew louder as they approached the door. Sarah, without hesitation, quietly opened the back door and helped Melody escape through the window. The little girl rushed outside, but she barely heard a loud call from behind. "Melody Sullivan," a voice shouted. Melody stopped, her heart racing. She turned around, but her mother was no longer there. She could feel danger closing in. Melody ran quickly through the alley, her hands trembling as she clutched her belongings. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to run to escape the people chasing her and her mother. The only thing she knew was that she needed to find a safe place. At that moment, Elizabeth Alex's mother appeared unexpectedly. She walked up to Melody and gently pulled her into her car. "Don't worry, you're safe now. I'm Elizabeth Harrington, Alex's mom," she said, her voice soft and warm. Melody looked at her, unsure of what to do. She couldn't understand why a stranger would want to help her, but Elizabeth's eyes were full of sincerity, and Melody couldn't refuse. "You'll be safe, just follow me," Elizabeth said, gently patting Melody's hand. Melody looked at her mother one last time, then stepped into the car. A new journey was beginning, and she didn't know where she was headed, but she knew her life would never be the same again. Inside Elizabeth Harrington's car, Melody sat silently looking out the window. The scenery outside began to blur as the car drove into the darkness. A strange feeling rose in her heart. She didn't know why, but she could sense a change coming. Something she couldn't fully understand, but deep down, she knew her life would never be the same. Elizabeth glanced at Melody, her eyes filled with concern. "You don't have to be afraid. You'll be safe. I'll protect you." Melody just nodded, saying nothing. She was used to moving from one place to another, but this feeling of being helped by a stranger made her feel confused. How long had it been since she felt like she was part of a family? She had grown accustomed to not having a home, and now someone was willing to protect her. But it wasn't her mother. Melody couldn't fully understand the conflict in her heart. She looked out the window, watching the dim light of the street lights pass by like streaks of light in the night. A part of her wanted to trust Elizabeth's help, but another part remained cautious, unable to easily accept this change. "Thank you for helping me," Melody said softly, her voice barely audible. Elizabeth smiled gently. "You can call me Elizabeth. I know you're confused, but trust me, I'll never harm you." As the car headed toward a quiet area, Elizabeth decided to break the silence, starting a conversation with Melody to make her feel more comfortable. "Can you tell me about your mom? I understand you don't want to talk about the past, but I want to help you." Elizabeth asked, her voice gentle but full of concern. Melody stared at Elizabeth for a long time as if considering her words. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "My mom is Sarah. We always have to move. My mom used to work for someone very important before we had to leave. I don't know much about her past, only that we've had to run away many times because of some people." Melody stopped, not continuing. Elizabeth looked into Melody's eyes, realizing that the little girl was hiding a deep fear. She didn't press her, just gently asked, "What did your mom do to protect you?" Melody lowered her head, her eyes hiding her worry. "Mom always protected me. She never let me see anything bad, but I can feel that sometimes she's worried, and the times we had to change names, change places. I don't understand everything, but I know Mom is running from someone. And now, maybe they're looking for us." Elizabeth sighed. She had begun to understand some of the fear Melody and her mother faced. The secrets of Sarah's past were starting to surface. But one thing Elizabeth couldn't expect was the connection between Sarah and Adrian Drake, her ex-husband, whom she had tried to avoid for years. Now all the memories of the past were about to confront the truth. Melody, Elizabeth said, after a moment of silence, "There's something I need to tell you. Your mom is not just running because of what you think. She may have a very special connection with my father, Adrian Drake." Melody looked up, her eyes full of surprise and confusion. "Adrian Drake. Who is he?" Elizabeth nodded, her eyes full of sorrow. "He's Alex's father, my son. But I don't think your mom knows that Adrian is the one who made everything so complicated. Sarah used to work for him, and I'm afraid that what I've found might not just be about your mom." As Elizabeth spoke with Melody, the investigations by the detective team continued. Adrian had started to realize that the relationship between Sarah and Melody was not just a mother-daughter one. He had heard from his detectives that Sarah had been part of his life, a part he had tried to bury. Sarah wasn't just an old assistant. She was also the woman Adrian had once had an affair with. That relationship ended when Sarah got pregnant, and Adrian had forced her to sign a contract in exchange for a settlement. This explained Sarah's anger and haste when she was fired from the company. But what was the truth behind it? Adrian never truly knew that Melody could be his daughter. When Adrian received the information that Sarah had given birth to Melody, he was stunned. It was a huge shock to him. In those first moments, Adrian didn't want to believe it. He asked himself, could Melody really be my daughter? Yet one thing he could not deny were the similarities he noticed in the musical style of Melody and Alex. Both had innate musical talent, but more importantly, they both felt music with their hearts rather than just their eyes. Adrian couldn't continue living with this doubt. He decided to uncover the truth. He ordered his detectives to confirm this information and was ready to face the consequences. But what troubled Adrian the most was the question, what will I do if Melody really is my daughter? A week later, as the situation grew more tense, Sarah finally realized that she couldn't keep running. One day, as she was preparing to leave her hiding place with Melody, She sensed the presence of the men looking for her. Sarah couldn't help but feel the tension. Melody once again was at the center of all these threats, and she couldn't let her daughter suffer any more harm. This time, it wasn't just the danger threatening them, but also the dark secrets of Sarah's past closing in on her. She had to decide once again, run or face the truth, even if it could destroy everything. Melody looked at her mother, her eyes full of fear. She couldn't understand everything, but one thing she felt clearly was that no matter what happened, her mother would always be the one to protect her. Now, they could only rely on Elizabeth's help, someone Melody felt she could trust. After leaving Elizabeth's house, Melody felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. From that moment on, her anxieties only grew stronger. Melody had never liked change, and now the fear of the unknown was clearer than ever before. Even though she had decided to go with Elizabeth, she couldn't shake the unanswered questions that haunted her mind. What will happen to Mom? What will happen when the truth is revealed? She missed her mother terribly. Sarah had always been the only person Melody could trust, the one who had always protected her from danger. But now, as the old family secret slowly began to emerge, Melody felt as though she was losing an important part of her life. She didn't know where she was going, or if she would ever be able to live her life as she had before. Sitting in Elizabeth's car, Melody's eyes were fixed on the window. The building streets and people passing by all blurred in her vision. The familiar images became distant as Melody realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't go back to the past. A new road awaited her, and it would not be easy. Elizabeth noticed Melody's silence and understood that the young girl was grappling with an anxiety she couldn't articulate. She understood the complex emotions swirling inside Melody. However, Elizabeth knew it was time to share the truth with her, even though it might cause her pain. Melody. Elizabeth began, her voice gentle. You have the right to know the truth about your mother and your family's past. But I also understand that you may not want to face it. However, I think no matter what, you need to prepare for what's coming. Melody turned to look at Elizabeth, her eyes full of surprise. What truth, Elizabeth? Did my mother do something wrong? Why has everything turned out this way? Elizabeth sighed and placed a comforting hand on Melody's shoulder. Your mother, Sarah, is not a stranger to my family. In fact, she and I have a very complicated past. I can't tell you everything right now, but part of her past is connected to Adrian Drake. And if you really want to know about your family, that truth won't be easy to accept. Melody went silent. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Adrian Drake? She asked, almost as if she needed to be sure she hadn't misunderstood. Who is he, and how could he possibly be connected to my mother? Elizabeth looked into Melody's eyes, her sincerity in her gaze making her patient. Adrian is Alex's father, my son, and your mother, Sarah, was a part of his life many years ago. They had a very complicated relationship, and I fear that if these secrets come to light, everything will change forever. Melody felt her head spinning. She couldn't comprehend this truth. Sarah, her mother, had a connection to Adrian Drake, a man she had never known. And even more unimaginable, this could be related to her own life, her identity. Why had her mother kept this secret all these years, and why was everything suddenly becoming so complicated? As Melody's mind raced with chaotic thoughts about the newly revealed truth, Elizabeth continued to explain more about Sarah's past and her relationship with Adrian. She used to work for Harrington Enterprises, but after a major incident she was fired, but it didn't stop there. When Sarah became pregnant with you, Adrian forced her to sign an agreement in exchange for money rather than fight for what was rightfully hers. I don't know all the details, but I know Sarah's silence is connected to something much bigger. Melody stayed silent for a moment, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She couldn't imagine the scene described by Elizabeth, but what troubled her even more was the unspoken question. Why had her mother chosen silence? If this truth was so important, why had her mother never shared it with her? Melody, I don't want to make you worry, but you need to understand that whether you want to or not, this truth can't be hidden forever. Elizabeth continued, her voice firm. Adrian is someone who won't stop until everything is exposed, and that truth is coming closer. Melody lowered her head, a deep sadness spreading through her heart. She felt like she was falling into a whirlpool she couldn't escape from. But no matter how painful it was, she understood that she had to face the truth, not just for herself, but for her mother, and for everything she had endured over the years. Although the complex thoughts still occupied Melody's mind, she began to realize that she couldn't go on this journey alone. Elizabeth was not a stranger, and she was the only one who could help her understand more about the past and the secrets her mother had kept hidden. Melody looked into Elizabeth's eyes, feeling the genuine care from this woman. Elizabeth, voice, I don't know what to do next. I can't change the past. My mother did what she thought was right, but I still don't understand why she hid this from me about Adrian, about everything. Elizabeth reached out and gently patted Melody's hand. You don't have to do everything alone. I'll help you understand everything. We'll find the truth together. No one can do this alone in life, Melody. A warm feeling spread through Melody's heart. She realized that no matter how painful the truth would be, at least she wouldn't have to face it alone. There was someone willing to stand by her side, helping her navigate the challenges. Things seemed to be heading toward a dead end, but while Melody and Elizabeth were searching for answers, Adrian decided to continue his pursuit of the truth. He no longer doubted the connection between him and Melody. The mixed emotions, the ambiguity of the past, had now become a tangled mess in his mind. Adrian had instructed his detectives to trace Sarah and Melody's whereabouts once again, but this time, he didn't just want to know about them. He wanted to understand the secrets Sarah had kept hidden. What terrified him the most was the question, if Melody truly was his daughter, what would he do? The relationship between Adrian and Sarah had ended long ago, but the truth about Melody could be something he couldn't easily ignore. Once again, Adrian was faced with emotions he had never wanted to feel. As everything gradually escalated, no one could avoid the confrontation. Melody would have to face the truth about herself, about the past her mother had tried to conceal. She would have to confront Adrian Drake, the man who might become her father, and Alex, who she had come to regard as a friend. Meanwhile, Elizabeth remained steadfast by Melody's side, not only to protect her, but also to help her seek answers to the questions she had carried for all these years. The journey of seeking the truth, of rediscovering herself, was nearing its end. But could Melody and her family overcome all these challenges? As Melody looked ahead, the chaotic thoughts still filled her mind. She couldn't imagine what tomorrow would bring, or whether her relationship with Elizabeth would be enough to face it all. But one thing was clear: she could never go back to the life she had known, and she couldn't keep running forever. She remembered the first time she met Alex. Back then, she had simply wanted to help the boy, but now her life had turned in a completely different direction. She was no longer a carefree child. She was stepping into a world full of complexity where every step could change everything. And of course, facing the truth was unavoidable. Melody was sitting in Elizabeth's living room when her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Elizabeth took the call, and her tone was more serious than usual. "All right, I'll be there right away," Elizabeth said, then hung up. "Who was that?" Melody asked, her eyes curious, but filled with worry. "It was the detective I hired. They've found Sarah and the little girl," Elizabeth replied, standing up and walking toward the door. "We need to meet them. This could be the opportunity to clear everything up." Melody felt her heart tighten. Where was her mother? Her mother had been on the run for so long, but had they finally found her? Questions bombarded Melody's mind, but all she could do was follow Elizabeth. She couldn't refuse anymore. The truth had to be faced, no matter how painful. At a quiet cafe near downtown, Elizabeth and Melody entered. A well-dressed man was sitting waiting for them. He looked up when they walked in and smiled slightly, though his smile lacked warmth. He was the detective Elizabeth had hired to assist them throughout the investigation. "Hello, Mrs. Harrington. Hello, young lady," he said, standing and shaking their hands. "We've found Sarah." Melody felt a chill run down her spine. Her mother? They had found her. She couldn't say a word, just stood silently, her eyes full of anxiety. The detective handed Elizabeth a thick file. "This is what we've found on Sarah Sullivan. There are some very important things you might want to know." Elizabeth took the file and opened it. She skimmed through the pages, her eyes stopping at a passage. Sarah? She used to be an employee at Harrington Enterprises, and here, the connection between her and Adrian Drake, Elizabeth said, her voice trembling slightly. Melody moved closer, trying to look at the pages. She didn't understand everything, but one thing she could sense was the tension in the air. Elizabeth put the documents down and looked into Melody's eyes. Melody Sarah worked for Adrian Drake, Elizabeth said, and at one point she was pregnant. Adrian is the father of the little girl. Melody froze, everything crashing down around her. The connection between her mother and Adrian Drake, Alex's father. Now everything was clear. She couldn't say anything, just stood still, trying to process everything. "Do you understand, Melody?" Elizabeth asked, her voice full of concern. "Adrian might be your father, and this can't be hidden forever." Melody felt like everything around her was falling apart. Her mother had once been part of the Drake family, and now she was discovering that she might be Adrian's daughter. Her mother had hidden this truth all these years, not just to protect herself, but also to protect Melody from a past she couldn't even imagine. Melody couldn't believe what she had just heard. Why had her mother kept this from her? Why had she never told her about these things? After the detective left, Elizabeth and Melody sat in silence. Melody felt like she had lost everything. She didn't know what was right or wrong anymore. Her mother had kept secrets for so long, but why? For what reason? Elizabeth could feel the chaos in Melody's heart. She knew that the little girl was enduring a pain that no one could truly understand. But one thing Elizabeth was certain of. Melody, you don't have to do anything right now. You don't have to make any decisions in haste. Let me help you learn more about everything. Melody looked at Elizabeth, tears silently falling. "I don't know what to do anymore. My mother has hidden everything from me. If she had told me about Adrian, would things have been different?" Elizabeth reached out and gently took Melody's hand. "The truth always has power, Melody. It might hurt us, but it will also make us stronger. You'll have to face it not just for yourself, but for your mother and for everything you deserve to know." Melody sighed, her gaze gradually becoming more resolute. She could no longer live in the darkness of secrets. She needed to understand the truth, no matter how painful it was. "So what do I do next?" Melody asked, her voice hoarse with emotion. Elizabeth smiled gently, patting Melody's hand. "We'll start from here, Melody, and you don't have to do this alone." Melody's life seemed to be changing with every passing day. She would not only have to face the truth about her mother's relationship with Adrian, but she would also have to confront herself. Would she be able to accept the truth that she might be Adrian Drake's daughter, a man she had only met once through his son Alex? That question would only be answered when she met Adrian face to face, when she confronted him and understood the relationship between her mother and him. But would Adrian be ready to face the truth? Would he accept her as his daughter? A week after the tense meeting with Elizabeth, Melody felt as though she was living in a completely different world. Everything around her seemed to have lost its color, as though her life had become a dull and gray monotony. The information about Sarah Adrian and their strange relationship kept spinning in Melody's mind. She couldn't find answers to the remaining questions, and she couldn't understand the secrets her mother had kept hidden for so many years. Today, Melody sat in the living room of Elizabeth's house, holding a book she had no desire to open. She felt as if she were living in a sealed space where no one could help her untangle the knots in her soul. Elizabeth walked into the room, seeing Melody sitting quietly with distant eyes. She said nothing, only sat beside the young girl. "Melody?" Elizabeth began, her voice gentle but filled with determination. "You can't keep living in fear and worry like this. You need to face your emotions. You can't run away forever." Melody looked at Elizabeth, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She didn't speak, but Elizabeth's words felt like a push from within. Perhaps she was right. She couldn't continue to live in these negative emotions. She had to learn to face everything, no matter how painful. Melody stepped outside of Elizabeth's house on a cloudy afternoon. The feeling inside her was indescribable. She had been through so many emotions over the past week, from the shock of learning about Adrian to the disappointment in her mother when she realized how much her mother had kept from her. Everything was truly difficult to face. Her feet led her almost unconsciously to a small park nearby, a place she often went when she needed some time for herself. Melody sat down on a bench, gazing at the clouds in the sky. Part of her wanted to avoid the truth, not wanting to face what was waiting ahead. But another part urged her to stand up to look directly at the truth and take control of her emotions. "Melody, what are you doing here?" A familiar voice came from behind. Melody turned and saw Alex standing nearby, looking at her with concern. "Alex?" Melody hesitated but couldn't say more. She didn't want to expose her emotions, but Alex's presence felt like a fresh breeze in her heart. Melody couldn't understand why he seemed to understand her so well, even though they had only known each other for a short time. Alex sat down beside Melody, saying nothing, just quietly watching her. It seemed as though he knew that Melody didn't want to voice the painful things in her heart. But he also knew that sometimes just the presence of a friend could help ease the pain in someone else's heart. "Melody, if you need to talk, I'm always here to listen," Alex said gently, as if wanting to comfort her. Melody turned to look at Alex, her eyes full of both gratitude and deep sorrow. "I don't know what to do anymore, Alex. My mom has kept so many things from me. I feel like everything has collapsed." Alex looked at her and gently placed his hand on Melody's shoulder. "Melody, you're not alone. If you don't know what to do, I'll be here with you. Everything will be okay because we'll face it together." From that afternoon onwards, Melody began to change slowly. In the following days, she started to accept that she couldn't live in worry and fear forever. Alex had always been her companion, the only one who truly understood her, even though he didn't know all the secrets Melody was facing. But their friendship had become a strong source of support, helping Melody get through the sorrow in her heart. She no longer felt alone in her journey. Alex became the person she could trust, the one she could share all her emotions with without fearing judgment. He was not just her only friend. He helped her realize the value of friendship sharing and support. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park, Melody suddenly turned to Alex and gave him a soft smile. "Thank you, Alex. I've never had a friend like you." Alex smiled back simply, but sincerely, "I'm really glad I can be your friend, Melody." Though their friendship grew stronger, worries about Adrian and Sarah still haunted Melody. She knew that one day, she would have to confront Adrian, her father, to understand the truth about herself. And because of that, the pain inside her heart grew even greater. One evening after returning to Elizabeth's house, Melody decided she could no longer live in this ambiguity. She walked into her room, took out her phone, and searched for Sarah's number. After a few seconds of hesitation, Melody pressed the call button. On the other end, a familiar voice spoke. "Melody, how are you?" Sarah asked, her voice full of concern. "Mom, I need to talk to you," Melody said, her voice catching in her throat. "What's wrong, dear?" Sarah asked, clearly noticing the tension in her daughter's voice. "I need to know the truth, Mom. I need to know about your past with Adrian. You can't hide it from me anymore," Melody replied, her voice full of determination. The next day, Sarah came to meet Melody at Elizabeth's house. She entered the room looking at her daughter with eyes full of worry and love. "Melody, you know, don't you?" Sarah asked, her voice full of regret. Melody looked into her mother's eyes and no longer felt fear. "I need you to tell me everything. Why did you hide it from me? Why didn't you ever tell me about Adrian?" Sarah sighed and sat down beside Melody. "Sweetheart, everything isn't as simple as you think. I just wanted to protect you from that painful past. I know you deserve a happy life, not one haunted by the ghosts of the past." Melody looked at her mother, her heart filled with pain. She felt her mother's words were both an apology and a promise she couldn't fully keep. In the end, Melody understood that no matter how painful Sarah and Adrian's past was, she could no longer live in secrecy. She needed to face the truth about her father, about the relationship between her mother and Adrian, and most importantly, about herself. No matter how painful it was, no matter how much she had to let go of her past, Melody decided she would no longer run away. She had friendships, good friends like Alex to rely on, and above all, she had the strength to accept the truth.